You can be seated. So, I am usually a very positive person. Some people have even accused me of being a Pollyanna. You know, that my wife says she's married to Ted Lasso. I don't know if some of y'all have seen that show on television, but, and, you know, some people say, well, the glass is half full or the glass is half empty. And usually I say, well, hey, at least we have a glass, right? And that's kind of how I usually approach life. I try to get along with everyone. I try to love everyone, but I have a problem. This last year's been tougher. It's been tough for me to do that. I've tried to put on the same facade, but there's lots of groups and lots of people out there that, well, I'll just say it, they've offended me. See, the problem is love is costly. Love comes at a cost. And I don't know that I've been able to pay it lately. In fact, I made a list. I don't know if you have a list of people who offend you, but I made a list of people who've offended me this last year. So I'm going to pull some up on the slides here. Democrats, Republicans, people who wear MAGA hats, people who wear BLM hats, that guy on CNN, that gal on Fox News, people who were born local in New Braunfels, people who just moved here from California, Moms of New Braunfels Facebook page, Dads of New Braunfels Uncensored, people who tell me I have to wear a mask, people who don't wear masks, people who got a stimulus check who didn't need it, people who complain that they didn't get a stimulus check, in-laws. And I'll have to say, to make it a little more personal for me, my wife. All these people have offended me in some way, and I've struggled against that. Now, your list might include your kid's team coach who sits him on the bench and puts some other kid who's not near as good, lets them play ahead of him. It may be your coach. It may be a classmate or a teacher. It may be millennials or boomers. I'm just underneath that, by the way. I'm not quite there. It may be your parents or even your kids. But I'm guessing as I was going along, maybe all of you made a little quick list in your head of people you find offensive or that you struggle against. I have to admit, sadly, that list took me about 5 minutes to come up with. You see, we want to be loving and encouraging, and we think as Christians, getting along should be easy. But it seems difficult to me lately. Love is hard. So we say we want to love, but our love comes with unless. Unless they do this, unless they offend me, unless they don't believe the same way I do. In fact, we exist in a cancel culture where when folks are hard to love, we just cancel them. We say we want to be loving, but our love has limits. Our love comes with conditions. It has an unless they hurt me, unless they make fun of me, unless they demean me or insult me. In fact, these days it feels like we say, even if they just disagree. But as we listen to the words of Jesus this morning, if you want to turn over to Matthew chapter 5, we're going to continue our study there in verses 38 through 48. I think Jesus is going to explain to us that love comes at a cost. It comes because love is not fair and it's not easy. So I'm going to read Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 42. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. Wow, it seems kind of difficult to me. You see, love comes at a cost. And the first point I want to make this morning that I think Jesus is trying to explain to us is love is not fair. What does fair mean? It means equitable or just. And I think especially in our society, being a democracy, we're capitalistic, we want to be rewarded for our work. We want to get what we pay for. We want to be not subject to prejudice, but judged impartially. We want justice. But as we go through this text, I think we're going to learn some things about justice. Let's look at verse 38. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now that just sounds good. That's biblical. It comes from the Old Testament, and it's mentioned in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. And you know, when I talk to friends about things like this, I think, yeah, that's perfect. You know what? Politicians should have to pass a law that whenever they pass a law, they have to do it for a year before we have to. Now that would be fair, right? But you know, this law was originally written not to seek vengeance, but to prevent vengeance. You see, because what happens is when someone hurts you, and maybe they cause an accident and you lose an eye or you lose a tooth, this law was written so that you wouldn't overcompensate. You wouldn't overtake your vengeance. It would only be equal. But now God is calling us to even higher standard. In verse 39 and 40, we're supposed to offer the other cheek. Even when we get sued, we're supposed to be generous. Okay, now everyone raise your hand if you've been sued. Just kidding, don't do that. All right, but I've been sued once before. And I just want to tell you that it was awful. It was months of just thinking about it all the time, obsessing about it, wondering, should we have done something different? And it was totally baseless, at least in my opinion, right? And even all the lawyers and the judge, everybody said, this is baseless. You know, it's right. But the insurance company wanted to settle out of court, right? And it just ate at me because it wasn't fair. I didn't do anything wrong, I would scream. But it wasn't fair. And God says here, He calls us to such a standard that seems almost impossible, doesn't it? That when you get sued and someone says, give me whatever it is, that you actually give them more. It sounds crazy. In verse 41, it says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Some of your versions may say, if a soldier asks you to go 1 mile, carry his equipment. So the idea here was that they were, if you remember Israel at this time, they were under Roman rule. Now, when I used to read this scripture, I would think, oh, that'd be like a Marine coming up to me and going, hey, could you carry some of this gear for me? And I'd be like, yes, sir. And like, you know, just hop right in there and carry it along with them and take it. And hey, let me go a little further. This is great. What an honor. No. Someone pointed out to me this week that this was this was not that situation. Remember, it'd be like if China took over the United States and we were under Chinese communist rule, and a Chinese soldier who was standing somewhere out in public and you were walking by trying not to make eye contact, and suddenly he would say, hey, you, carry this. That's different, isn't it? And Jesus calls us that we would pick that up, and not only would He carry it where He asked us, but we would say, do you want to go further? Do you need me to take it back? It's crazy. In verse 42, it says, give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. Just not too long ago, I was on vacation with my friends Kelly and Sue, and we were kind of on this little area. We were outside a coffee shop. We were sitting outside, and this man came up, and he started talking to my friend Kelly. And he was telling him this big story about how he was trying to get money to buy food for a group of guys who were homeless. And he was telling this whole story. But even as he was telling the story, you kind of wonder, like, it sounded sketchy, right? I mean, it sounded like he was making it up. So my friend asked him a few questions first. And just knowing Kelly, I thought he's going to trip him up and he's going to say, I'm not sure you're really asking for this. I think, you're wanting it for something else, and I'm not sure you deserve it or something like that. I thought that's what he was going to do, but he didn't. He asked him a few questions. He asked him more about why he was getting the money. And even though it sounded off, he reached into his pocket and he gave him, I don't know exactly how much, but he gave him a significant amount of money. And the man thanked him and said, "God bless you," and he ran off. Now, it was a sketchy story, but my friend gave him money anyway. Why? Not because he's nicer than most of us. Trust me, he's not. Sorry, Kelly. But because he thinks of it as God's money and not his. Because he wants to be like Jesus. You see, Jesus didn't share with those who deserved it, but with those who didn't. Grace isn't for those who deserve it, it's for those of us who don't. And that's the type of life that God is calling to us in these verses. But I think there's two reasons we have trouble obeying this section of Scripture right here. Is number one, we can't be trusted to determine what's fair. I'm reading a book called Unoffendable by Brett Hansen. Highly, highly recommend it. It's an incredible book. In fact, I'm reading it for the second time because it's a life-changing type of book about the love of God. And in it, this quote, he says, "Oh yes, the heart is deceptive, and that calls for humility above all else, because my heart isn't deceptive because it fools other people. It's deceptive because it fools me." You see, Proverbs 14:12 says, "There is a path before each person that seems right, but it ends in death." Even Paul says in 1 Corinthians 4, verses 1 through 4, "So look at Apollos and me as mere servants of Christ, who have been put in charge of explaining God's mysteries." Now, a person who is put in charge as a manager must be faithful. "As for me, it matters very little how I might be evaluated by you or any human authority. I don't even trust my own judgment on this point. My conscience is clear, but that doesn't prove I'm right. It is the Lord himself who will examine me and decide." You see, love isn't fair or even just from our perspective, but it's difficult for us to obey it because we can't even be trusted to determine what's really fair. We don't have God's perspective. Now, the second reason is that Paul leads into it is that justice is the Lord's realm. It's not ours. That's why love seems unfair. You see, we really want justice for ourselves, right? But we want justice for everyone else, but we want mercy for ourselves. He goes on to say in 1 Corinthians 4 there, "So don't make judgments about anyone ahead of time before the Lord returns, for he will bring out our darkest secrets to light and reveal our private motives. Then God will give to each one whatever praise is due." Some friends of mine here at the Springs, the Myers, they have a little saying that I think is hilarious in their family, that fair is the F word. So when the kids were younger and they would go, "That's not fair," and the rest of the children would be like, "Oh," because they knew they were getting in trouble now. Because fair was the F word, because the Myers understand that life as we go through it isn't fair from our perspective. I struggle with this the most, I think, with those closest to me. When I'm around Linda, I mentioned earlier that I tend to be a pretty positive person, so when people say stuff that's offensive or they do things, I kind of go, "Oh, well, maybe they're having a bad day, Maybe they didn't really understand what was going on." I make excuses for everyone else, but when I'm with Linda, I feel like I deserve to be treated well, right? She's my wife. She should love me really well. We've been married 33 years. Come on. It's all because of her, apparently. So, because I want her to be fair, like if I help out around the house a lot, I think she should speak to me kindly. I think she should treat me better. She should be more affectionate because I want fairness. I want justice, right? And I don't always extend mercy. It's hard because love is not fair. And it may not seem just. And you know what? The second point is, in the next section, it's just not easy. So let's continue in Matthew chapter 5. I'll be reading verses 43 through 48. You've heard that it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and send rains on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You must therefore be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Whew, that's tough, all right? I see why John's out of town now. He didn't want to cover this section. You see, here Jesus contrasts how the world, how most people tend to treat each other. They tend to love those who treat them well. But that's not how God loves. And he calls us to a higher standard. So I want to think about, who is my enemy? What is an enemy? So I looked it up, and some synonyms are adversary or opponent. There was some research done by Nathan Heflick, a PhD, who studied, why do people have enemies? Why do some people have more enemies? What's all that about? And in summarizing that in his article, he says this: research suggests that people create enemies in order to maintain a stable, coherent, clear view of the world. This is because then they can contribute the negatives of the world, which are inevitable, to these enemies. Having enemies even appears to make people feel, ironically, safer. Now, to be clear, he continues, I'm not encouraging people to have enemies. There are obvious drawbacks to having enemies, of course, and there are other ways to find meaningful and coherency than to have enemies. But do you have enemies because you've been harmed by them or vehemently disagree with them on some moral, political, or religious view? Perhaps. But you possibly have enemies because you created them in order for your life to be more meaningful. Ouch. Well, I'm not sure this has a great basis in Scripture. It kind of makes the same point, doesn't it? That we keep enemies because it's easier. It's easier to find that, or it's easier to feel right. It's easier to justify ourselves if we have enemies than it is to love, because love's not easy. So I did some surveying about, I talked to a lot of people this last couple of weeks. I interviewed quite a few people, just, hey, have you ever had an enemy? Do you have any enemies? You know what most of them said? Not really. They might have mentioned a person that bullied them back in junior high or something of that manner, maybe a rival like on a sports team or something, maybe somebody at work that they don't get along with. But in general, people thought, I don't really have enemies. But we live in a cancel culture right now. So when I was making that list, I want you to think about, what was the list running in your head? When I get so offended that I want to silence someone or show them up or prove that I'm right, guess what? I'm making them my enemy. Have you ever been unfriended? Like on Facebook or something like that? Have you ever unfriended someone? Then I think I know you know what I'm talking about. If you're offended by someone to the point that it affects the way you treat them, you've made them your enemy. I said this kind of little prayer in my head over and over this week. God, forgive me when I'm offended by illegal aliens, and then turn around and sing the old hymn, here we are but straying pilgrims. Well, now we've established we all have enemies. How in the world can we love them? How can I love the people who offend me? Can I just make excuses for them or just try to look for the silver lining? Well, I think Jesus gives us the answers right here in these verses. Look at verse 44. He says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. You've heard it said, but I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. I've been thinking about that verse all week. And it came to me that what if half of the nation who voted for Trump prayed every day for President Biden? That he would be successful, that God would draw him close and bless him. How would our nation look in 4 years? Proverbs 24:17 says, don't rejoice when your enemies fall. Don't be happy when they stumble, for the Lord will be displeased with you and turn his anger away from them. We need to start praying for the people who offend us and not trying to prove to people that we're right. Now, how do we do that? God calls us here in verse, even in the continuing verses, when you look at it closely, he's like, that's what everyone else does, but that's not what God followers do. That's not what, in the kingdom of God, that's not how we treat people. We don't just love the people who treat us well. We don't categorize people by what groups they belong to. We love them anyway. And how do we do that? How do we make that happen? I think what he's asking us to do is we have to eliminate our self-righteousness, to worry so much that we're right, and remember what Jesus has done for us. If you don't know God, you're going to love those who love you. But if you thank God, maybe you can love even those who don't love you. I think that makes it more local, more personal. Think of someone on your hit list that we just made, someone who irritates you or has wronged you and just won't admit it or won't see it. Someone who's benefited maybe from some unfair advantage. Maybe we can commit to a simple prayer like this. Father, help me forgive Jeff just as you have forgiven me. Because I think if we can remember to be thankful for what God has done for me, then I can do the third thing here that God calls us to do, even though love is not easy. And that is to love like God. To love like our Father in heaven. Now that is a high standard. You know, I meet with some high school guys pretty regularly at a breakfast, and so I was asking them, do you have any enemies? And we talked through that a little bit. And then I said, well, how in the world can we love our enemies? What do you think that means? And one of the guys said this. Well, maybe, we have to remember that our enemies are people that are made in the image of God. So maybe by loving them, we're actually loving God. Wow, that was powerful. So let's kind of wrap this together. Because we see how difficult this scripture is to live up to do. But I think it applies, I know it applies to me. I think that all of you probably have a list in your head right now. But love always comes at a cost. Love is not fair. We realize that because we realize we can't even trust our own heart to know what is fair or just, and that justice is the Lord's realm anyway. And I think if we can help pay that cost, that love always comes at a cost, because we realize love is not easy. It's not meant to be, but God provides a way to be part of that perfection. We can pray for our enemies. We can remember that God made them in his own image. We can get rid of our self-righteousness and love like him. Those of you who know me pretty well may notice my wife and I, we almost always have on this bracelet. On it, there's a date. It's January 25th, 2013. That was just kind of the anniversary of that was just a few days ago. That was the day, the evening, that my daughter Lindsay was killed in a car accident. She had gone out with some friends. They were going to go to this dance. There were a bunch of them piled in a car, a big truck actually, a big F-250. And Um, Lindsay was a really good dancer. So she got invited all the time to go do this. And so they all jump in the car. They're all excited. They head out on this little country road outside of Abilene. She went to Abilene Christian University. And there's this junior high where these retirees throw a dance once or twice a month throughout the year. They don't allow smoking, drinking, all that kind of stuff, right? They kind of have a little potluck, and that's where they were headed. Really a fun evening in their sights. But at the same time as they were headed out, there was a man named Jeff Davis who had gone to a drug deal and was high on meth. And so on this little country road, as they were headed to that junior high, there's a road that comes in at a steep angle. And he ran the stop sign and he hit him head on. And Lindsay was killed. She was the only one in the truck that was killed. The others were injured pretty severely. When I got that call, I didn't want to believe it was true. I kept asking, "Are you sure?" It just didn't make sense to me. It didn't seem fair. So as we prepared for the funeral, the night before, I decided that I wanted to get up and say something. I wanted to speak at the funeral. And the night before, I was just really struggling. And I crawled in bed with my wife, and I asked her, I said, "Is it true? Is it really true? Everything that we've tried to live our life by, is it true that God loved us so much that he died for us and we will see Lindsay again? That we have the hope of eternal life? Can I get up tomorrow and tell people that? Because if it's either all true or it's not. And if it's not, let's just pull the covers over our head and pretend it didn't happen and try to find some kind of comfort some other way." And so I did get up that next day, and I told people that if through Lindsay's life and her death, that if one person was moved to listen to the words of Jesus and come to faith in him and be saved, it would be worth it. I don't even really remember that much about doing that. I was kind of numb, and I was just kind of trying to put one foot in front of the other. So I want to fast forward a few months. We're going up to Abilene for something. ACU was awesome, by the way, through all of this. And so we went up to a ceremony they were doing. And so we decided to stop by where the accident happened. It wasn't too far out of our way, and so we stopped. And someone, a friend of Lindsay's, had made this cross. And so we stopped and looked at it, and we cried a little bit. We were thankful she had friends that remembered her. But then we realized there was another cross. And it had a name on it of Jeff Davis. It had the date of when the accident happened, because you see, he was killed also in the accident. The accident that was his fault. And had the date, and so I realized when I looked at this again that he was 28 years old. He had a wife and kids, and Lindsay would have been 28 this year. You see, I realized there was two crosses. And you know what we wanted to do? In fact, if you look at it, that cross is bigger than the one for Lindsay. That really bothered me. There's more stuff around it, like more people had been there. There was notes. There was, and this is just taken recently, but when there was, more stuff, and people had kind of put up little emblems and all kinds of stuff around it, and I just wanted to tear it down because he was my enemy. How dare people memorialize him? How dare people honor him in some way? But then Lynn and I realized the symbol there was a cross. And that Jesus was calling me to forgive. He doesn't ask us to forget, but he does ask us to love. And it's so hard. It's not fair. It's not easy. But you know what has happened to me over this time? It's so life-giving. It's not fair. It's not easy. People still offend me. I still want to hate them, but you know what? Hate and bitterness, it's exhausting. But love brings life. What a relief that God says you don't have to be offended by people. You don't have to hold on to those things. Come to me. Love people the way that I've loved you. And once I realized, when I looked at that symbol, that my sin led to the murder of Jesus, yet he loved me anyway. So now I can learn to love Jeff Davis. On the cross, Jesus said, "Forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." Now I can start to learn when people offend me to say, "God, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." Yes, if we're to be like Jesus, we are to love like Jesus. In fact, this bracelet actually says, "Loving Lindsay." And the phrase we use on our website is, "Love like Lindsay." She had a big heart. She was full of life. Love comes at a great cost. But you know what? I don't have to pay it all. It's not up to me. I don't have to decide what's fair. Thank God, because I'm not good at it. It's not easy, but I don't have to do all the work because Jesus has gone before me. In fact, love comes at a great cost, but Jesus paid it on the cross so we can love just like him. So I'm calling out to this morning, if you are here and you don't know that love, please come to us afterwards, talk to us, because it is offering you so much life. Because Jesus actually did love the world so much that he died for your sin, for my sin, for Jeff Davis's sin, for your enemies' sins, so that we could love just like him. And if you're here this morning and you've been bitter, you're a Christian, but you have forgotten what God has done for you, I pray that you will start today to love like Jesus. It's costly, but it's so freeing. Let's pray. Lord, I just thank you that you went on before us, that you have gone and loved. Your life demonstrated that it can be done. You came and you were just like us. The people scorned you and you faced all kinds of adversaries. And yet you were perfect, and you've called us to be perfect like you here in Matthew. It seems so impossible until we remember that you paid the price. And we're just so thankful this morning. And as we get ready to take communion, we just remember that, Lord, of what you've done for us. I thank you. I thank you for your sacrifice. I thank you that you love me despite my sin. And through your name I pray.